إن الحمد لله نؤمن به ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق الخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراط مستقيم. Brothers and sisters, I thank you for the honor and for inviting me to give the khutbah today. I come to you from my hometown where I grew up, of Tennessee, in Knoxville, Tennessee. And you're very blessed here, mashallah, to have a very beautiful and big community, a big masjid, a very well-known and beautiful imam, and a very well-known and popular and successful Islamic school right next door. These are all blessings that you all have in this community that you should constantly be grateful for. And alhamdulillah, we've had a very difficult Ramadan. Not only are the days long and the fast difficult, but we started Ramadan on a very high note, seeing on television the memorial services and the funeral of one of the greatest, probably will be the greatest Muslim ever to live in America, ever to be known throughout the world. In American Muslim history, it's probably not going to get as good as Muhammad Ali, rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy on his soul. And they say that he is, after Michael Jackson died, that he was the most recognized person on the earth. If you showed people his face on a picture, everyone around the world would know who Muhammad Ali was. And we saw, Quranic verses being recited on ESPN, on ABC, even on Fox News, beautiful memorial service. People were tweeting, how beautiful. I've never heard the Quran before. This is so beautiful to hear the Quran, to hear from Muslims. And I even know people many of you may have actually been at the janazah. I know people who were at the janazah who said that people were told, this is a Muslim janazah prayer. And some people even said, well, how can I be a Muslim so I can pray over him as well? And people even took shahada there just because they wanted to participate in the janazah prayer of Muhammad Ali. It's amazing. And we went from that high point a couple of days later to another crisis that hit our community, and especially our younger people, with what they say is the greatest mass shooting in modern American history in Orlando. And all of that elation and high spirituality and excitement, I think we all collectively felt like we were punched in the gut. And the air just went out of the room. And it was back to business again, back to the next crisis, back to the next attack, from San Bernardino to the Paris shootings, to all this happens every couple of months, it seems now. And it's very difficult on the community. It's very important for us as a community to go back and learn from history, and to especially go back and learn from the life of our beloved Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Are we as individuals, as families, as a community, going to respond to this crisis and to all these collective crises with bitterness, with hate, with despair and giving up? And many may be inclined to do so. I grew up in this country. My only exposure to Islam was at the Sunday school. I didn't even go to an Islamic school. And I remember being one of the only Muslims in public school going through when the Oklahoma City bombing occurred, and people at first suspected it was a Muslim, and just the insults that I received. My own siblings, I have young siblings in public school right now. My sister's the only hijabi in her school. She was recently insulted and called a terrorist on her school bus. My brother was told by a classmate and asked by a classmate, "Are you Muslim?" And he says, "Yes." And the girl sitting next to him said, "Well, my parents said Christians and Muslims cannot be friends. And she didn't talk to him after that. And I know there are countless stories, whether your kids are telling you or not, they're going through a lot in their schools on a daily basis. And just even if it's not verbal and explicit, they're going through it by the way people view them, see them, treat them, and it's difficult. And we can either respond by growing stronger as a community or by falling into despair, changing our names, leaving our identity behind, and not responding with strength. Looking at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, there is no one in the history of the world that faced more tribulation and hardship than him. Having to bury all of his children in his own lifetime, our beloved Prophet ﷺ had to bury all of his children while he was alive, except for Fatima radiallahu anha. He experienced family members killed in war, his companions and himself physically harmed, tortured sometimes. The loss of insults, personal insults against him, his family, and his companions. You could go through the seerah year after year, almost month after month, and see a difficult tribulation that he went through in the community, as a family, as an individual. But the way the Prophet ﷺ and the community responded is what we have to look at now as a community. The Prophet ﷺ responded in a few different ways. One is that he never sought personal revenge for an attack against him personally. He never took revenge on anyone that insulted him as an individual. There's the famous hadith, Sahih hadith, of the Prophet ﷺ when people tried to twist his name as an insult and call him mudhammam, meaning in Arabic, meaning the disgusting one. Many people were spreading this name of him as an insult and laughing, and are insulting this person named Mudhammam, and my name is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was his response. He didn't take it to heart, personal insults against him. He knew that Allah would give him success and defend this deen. So he didn't let things rattle him. He didn't respond to insult with injury. And he also responded to evil with good. And lastly, the Prophet ﷺ taught that even in the midst of a crisis, that we have to serve our fellow man, we have to serve each other. These are the four things that we have to learn when studying the history of our community and the history of the Prophet ﷺ. You know, Abraham Lincoln has a beautiful quote. He said, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, difficulty. But if you want to test a man's character, give him power, give him authority. Then you can really test someone's character." And if you look at the most difficult period, according to the Prophet ﷺ, the most difficult period of his life, after he lost his best friend and wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, after he lost his uncle who was giving him general protection within Mecca in the first years, after the boycott of Mecca, which many say may have resulted in Khadija radiallahu anha's death because Muslims were forced, because of that boycott and ban against them, sometimes forced to eat leaves off of the trees because of the general boycott against Muslims in Mecca. After that, he goes to Ta'if, and we know the story of Ta'if, where he was driven out of the city by people carrying stones, even children throwing stones at him and chasing him out of the city until he was bleeding, and even his own blessed sandals filled with blood. And he was given the choice by an angel, do you give me the authority to crush this town between two mountains? Power, authority, given to him right in that moment. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, perhaps there will be those among their children or grandchildren who will enter Islam and be believers. That's the test right there. And another beautiful lesson is, how did the Prophet ﷺ respond to personal insult and injury? It was by treating his enemies kindly and with respect and love. One of my favorite stories from the seerah is looking at the life of one of my favorite companions, Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu. This is a man who you could say at the time was an expert politician. He was like the Karl Rove of Quraysh. He was like the Henry Kissinger of Quraysh, a political strategist and genius. And when the Muslims tried to go to Abyssinia, he was the one that tried to bribe and convince the king of Najashi, the king of Abyssinia, to send the Muslims back to their families in Mecca. He joined many battles against the Muslims. He fought in Uhud. He was with Khalid ibn Walid with the group of horses when they came back and defeated the Muslims in that battle. He was with Khalid side by side. He was at the Battle of the Trench. And it wasn't until in the Sirah we reached the moment of Hudaybiyah when the tide began to turn and Muslims started to gain strength and strength and strength. People were entering Islam. Amr ibn al-As said, you know, I'm not going to become Muslim. I'm not going to stay in Mecca because maybe the Muslims will come back, take over. I'm going to move to Abyssinia. I'm going to move to where the Najashi is. And he moves there and he has a conversation with the king of Abyssinia. And they were friends. And in his talk, he slightly insulted the Prophet ﷺ. And this angered the Najashi, the king of Abyssinia, who was actually a Muslim. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he passed away, the Prophet ﷺ prayed over him. Najashi said, why are you insulting this man? Why don't you just give up all of your tactics and your strategies? And he was shocked. Amr ibn al-As, this companion, was shocked that the Najashi, who he thought was this Christian king, is telling him to stop plotting against the Prophet, stop trying to kill Muslims, defeat Muslims, rout Muslims, hurt the community, destroy the community. He said, just stop everything. Stop all you're doing and go accept Islam, because I know that this man will be helped just as Musa a.s. was helped against the Pharaoh. So just give up. And he took that. At that moment, he realized all of his strategies and all of his plots and Islamophobia and all of that were not going to go anywhere. And he decided at that moment, and faith entered his heart, to go to Medina. And while he was on the way to Medina, he caught up with Khalid bin Walid, who was also on his way to Medina to become Muslim. And as they entered into the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, this amazing war general, Khalid bin Walid, and this amazing political strategist, both entering to become Muslim at the same time, to put their hand in the hand of the Prophet ﷺ. Amr ibn al-As said, right before I put my hand in his hand, I said, hold on, I have a condition. I have a question. He said, are you sure that everything I've done will be erased after I become Muslim? All this evil and hardship and all this strategizing and maneuvering and harming you and harming the community, is this all going to be erased? And that the Prophet ﷺ promised him, he said, of course, when you enter Islam, everything that you've done of evil and sins are erased. And he accepted Shahada, and Amr ibn al-As said that he couldn't even look in the face of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ at that moment out of awe of him. And what's amazing, even more so than this, is that this was after 20 years of him plotting and being an enemy of the Muslims and an enemy of the Prophet ﷺ. And 1 year later, about 1 year later, there's a famous hadith, you can read it in the Shama'il of Imam Tirmidhi, a Sahih hadith, of where Amr ibn al-As comes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, boldly, asks him a question. Who is the most beloved person on this earth? Who is the most beloved person to you? Who do you love more than anyone else? Now, this guy, again, is the Karl Rove of Quraysh, very political strategist. Why would he even ask this question if he thought he wasn't going to get the answer he wanted? Very smart guy. He thought that the Prophet would say, you are the most beloved person to me. The Prophet ﷺ responds, my wife Aisha. And he says, no, among the men. The Prophet ﷺ says, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Then he says, okay, then who do you love the most? Then he goes to Umar. Then who? And then he keeps going and going, name after name, until in the hadith, Amr ibn al-As says, I wished I hadn't even opened my mouth. I wish I never asked that question, because he didn't mention my name. And the Prophet, you ask the Prophet ﷺ a question, he's going to give you an honest, direct answer. And the lesson from this is that, look at this man for 20 years, a stark, harsh, hating enemy of the Muslims and of Islam. And 1 year after becoming Muslim, he thinks that the Prophet loves me more than anyone else. because of how the Prophet ﷺ treated him with kindness, with forgiveness, for 1 year after he became Muslim, to the point where this man thought, I am his favorite person on earth. What does that tell us about how we should treat those who are harming us in order to change their hearts? We know in the Quran that Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala says that your harshest enemy, with good treatment, your harshest enemy can become your closest friend. And years later, Amr ibn al-As became governor of Egypt. In fact, any Egyptian here, any Syrian here, all of your worship is a sadaqah jariyah in the scale of Amr ibn al-As. If you think about that. What's amazing is that he brought Islam to Syria, he preserved Islam, he brought Islam to Egypt, he preserved Islam from being destroyed in Syria. And anyone who's Muslim today from those lands owes something to Amr ibn al-As, a man who was 20 years an enemy of the Prophet ﷺ. Think about the good that came out of this man. And years later, on his deathbed, he has a beautiful quote. I want to read this to you, where he said, in the first part of my life, I was a disbeliever, and I was one of the staunchest enemies of the Prophet ﷺ. And if I had died on that day as an enemy, I would have surely gone to the hellfire. Then I swore allegiance to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, and there was no person more dear to me than him, and more beautiful in my eyes than him. And if I wanted to describe him, I could never describe him, because I could not even stare at him in the face out of awe of him. And if I had died at that moment, right after becoming Muslim, I would have surely gone to paradise. Then after that, years later, I've been tested with power, I've been tested with a lot of wealth. And he said, I don't know where I'm going to go now. Heaven, hell, I don't know. And he raised his hands to the sky and he called upon Allah and he said, Oh Allah, I am not innocent, so forgive me. I am not strong, so help me. And if your mercy does not come to me, I will surely be of those destroyed. And he continued making dua till his final words were, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه غفور رحيم. Alhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Going back to this story, there's so many lessons from that story of Amr ibn al-As, one of which is how we should be, falling over backwards to care for the converts of our community, for example. Think about so many lessons we can learn from those who enter Islam, how we should be treating those who enter Islam, even if, especially, look at how he was treated as a convert who was an enemy of 20 years. How many people become Muslim? They're not our enemies. They've never done any harm to us. But it's just a shahada and a hug and a kiss at the takbir after they say their shahada. And have we all as a community collectively, we all know converts, some of whom don't have any family members fasting, eating iftar, going to the Eid prayer. How many of us have invited a convert over for iftar this Ramadan? And I hope that we pledge as a community, as a family, that you make an intention right now to try to find one person whose family is not Muslim and invite them over for iftar before the end of this month, and keep that relationship going, inshallah. But again, looking at the tribulation we face as a community, where poll numbers show 22%, this was actually 10 years ago, it's probably much worse, 22% of Americans say they don't want to have a Muslim as a next door neighbor. 6 out of 10 Americans say they've never actually met a Muslim. Only 7% of Americans say that they have a very favorable view of Islam. 56% of Americans say that Islam is at odds with American values. And even, we all know among Republicans, the majority of them say that they agree with Trump's proposed Muslim ban. Even many Democrats agree with the ban. And if you look at the polls, and 75% of news coverage about Muslims and Islam in the news is negative. These are all, you can look all these numbers up, I can give you the sources. So we're facing really difficult times. And if we're going to respond as a community, there's just a few things I want to mention. One is that the Prophet ﷺ, after experiencing many years of hardship, torture, oppression in Mecca, and he finally was able to emigrate to Medina. The first words the Prophet ﷺ said upon entering Medina are beautiful. And I mentioned that he responded to crises with service. What would he say? What did he say as soon as he entered Medina and everyone was waiting for him? What were the first words he said? Did he say, okay guys, let's get an army together, 5 years, maybe max, get all the weapons we can, build some alliances, and go take over Mecca? Was that what the Prophet ﷺ said as soon as he entered? Did he want to take revenge? The Prophet ﷺ said, Ya ayyuhan nas, afshu salam, wa at'imu ta'am, wa sallu bil layli wa nasu niyam, tadkhulu al-jannata bi salam. O people, spread peace. Feed the hungry, or feed people, and pray at night when others are sleeping, and you will enter paradise in peace. And look at the sequence of, and in one narration he also added before the prayer, maintain family ties. Look at all the 3 things he mentions before praying at night when others are asleep. Serving people, spreading peace, feeding people, all of these things. Before even praying at night when others are sleeping, he talks about strengthening your connection with Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala. He talks about feeding people, spreading peace, serving humanity. Before he mentions serving God, because that is one of the greatest and fastest ways to reach Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala and the pleasure of Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala is by serving people. And we have Muslims in this country, and you look at how many ahadith we have about the rights of our neighbors and kindness to our neighbors. There was an experiment done in Norway, and I'll close with this, where Muslims decided in one part of Norway, we're going to engage in an experiment where we invite our next door neighbors over for chai, for tea. That's all we're going to do. And hundreds of Muslim families just ask their neighbor, come over and meet us, let's have tea together, right? And they polled this community before and after, and they realized that Islamophobia and hatred and negative views of Islam had dropped in half, simply by inviting their neighbors over for tea. And how many Muslims do we have here? There's the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, a believer doesn't go to sleep full while their next door neighbor goes hungry. How many of us, if you think about that hadith, how do you even know if your neighbor is hungry or your neighbor has any needs if you don't even know their name? Let's think about that for a second. So I would like to urge us, and this is something we can all do. Don't depend on the masjid for all of your efforts and your interfaith programs and this and that. Go knock on your neighbor's door. And if you're worried about that, go with someone else. Go with another family member. Go with an ally among the interfaith community that knock on some of their doors. And don't even preach. Just say, I'm sorry, our name, we are the Khan family. We live right next door to you, or 2 doors down, and I apologize for the last few years, we've never introduced ourselves to you. But we just wanted you to know that we're here for you if you ever need anything at all. If you ever need help with your driveway being shoveled, or anything whatsoever, an emergency, anything, then we're here for you. At the very least, we can do that as Muslims. And if you go even further, take them some extra biryani, take them some extra, matluba. I really believe that feeding people and these things and just this human interaction will really help us as Muslims, and it is a part of our Sunnah. It's a big emphasized part of our Sunnah and our Seerah. And we also have to realize, if you look at the recent Pew study, a lot of us are like, Islam is the fastest spreading religion in America. There was a recent Pew study came out January of this year, which showed that for every person becoming Muslim in this country, there's another person leaving the door. As many Americans coming to Islam, there are people who grew up Muslim leaving Islam. And the only reason Islam is quickly spreading here is because we have a lot of babies, mashallah. But it's not because people are becoming Muslim, because people are leaving Islam and coming to Islam. So I want to urge us as a community and the administration here and everyone here that we have to have relevant programming for our kids, because they are going through a lot, and I've been there, and I've been in the public schools in a time that was not as hard as it is now. We didn't have Trump back then. We had it much easier than you all do today, and I feel for you. So I urge the administration here and our leaders among the Muslim community, have khutbahs and programs that speak to our youth and really solidify their relationship with Allah and with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We emphasize Quran and hifz a lot with our kids. Memorize Quran, memorize Quran, memorize Quran. The grandchild of the grandson of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu said, we used to teach our children seerah just as we taught them Quran. And our kids need to know our history and the history of the Prophet ﷺ, because the Quran needs to be a walking Quran. And how many people can take verses out of context when they don't know the seerah? The seerah will help you and our children understand the Quran. This is very, very important. So with that, I pray that Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala makes us benefit from this last half that's about to start of Ramadan. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم أعز الإسلام وأعز المسلمين. ربنا لا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا. اللهم لا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا. اللهم لا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا. Ya Allah, help us and help our children to stay firm on this deen despite the storms and the tribulations that they face. Help them with their fasting. Help them with their extra worship. Help them keep their faith secure and to grow in their iman until their last breaths. And help us all, our children and the adults and the elderly, help us all on the final moments of our lives to remember and to recite La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة.